Well, we're finally here. The big event, the thing everyone was wondering. Elizabeth Holmes is testifying. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Laura. This is Culture Nonsense. Remember to like this video if you like it and subscribe to the channel if you'd like more content like this. Today we are going to be diving back into the Elizabeth Holmes Theranos trial, and we're going to be talking about testimony from Thursday and Friday last week, the 18th and 19th, and then also, since trial on Monday was so short, we finally have Elizabeth Holmes' testimony. So she started giving her testimony on Friday afternoon for just about an hour, and then there was a weird issue where court started late on Monday and there was no explanation given. So I think she only talked for about 2 hours or so on that day as well. So that's what we're going to be covering in today's video. First of all, I know we all want to talk about Elizabeth Holmes, but we've got to backtrack a little bit and talk about the end of the prosecution's case for the trial. The next witness that the prosecution called after investors was Erin Tompkins, and she spoke about having a potential false HIV diagnosis after taking a Theranos test. And so this is one of those witness testimonies that was really meant to humanize the victims of Theranos and talk about how these machines and their results could be potentially fatal or at least extremely damaging if people think that they have diagnoses that they don't actually have. And there was a lot of back and forth about how her doctor might have thought that this result was wrong because she went to her doctor to have another test, and I guess that doctor couldn't come in for questioning. However, they called another doctor to the stand as well. This Arizona doctor, Mark Burns, spoke about this result of a prostogen-specific antigen test showing an odd result. And I guess they ran a new test 4 days later with Theranos, which showed a normal value. And then a third test was done again with another extremely high value. So a fourth result later in June came back with a result more in a normal range. So we have 2 in this abnormal range and 2 in a normal range. Dr. Burns actually spoke with Theranos employees about the results, saying he suspected the first and third results were errors. And he said, this is looking like either a sample integrity issue or some other interference in the patient sample affected the PSA test on Edison. During this cross-examination, he agreed that labs can have errors, but he said that in his experience, they're very rare. Dr. Burns had earlier ended his testimony for the government by saying his expert opinion was that one of the Theranos test results his patient received was invalid. Again, showing that Theranos machines were not giving out accurate results or consistent results, and this can be very dangerous. I think having these 2 real-world patient-doctor witnesses after some investors show the other side of victims for Theranos, because investors can be pretty hard to sympathize with. It's kind of like, oh, you're a billionaire. Who cares if you lost a couple $1 million in this fraud company? However, if you look at the actual human face of victims, like patients who received inaccurate results, it's another way to show that Theranos was harming people. The final person to testify for the prosecution, the 29th witness in this case at the end of 11 weeks, is Roger Parloff, and he is the man who wrote the Fortune article about Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes that gave her a very glowing, rosy review, and that Elizabeth then included in all sorts of investor packets for potential investors. So this is one of the things where her stardom was really taking off. It's probably the best piece of press she ever received. However, later on, Roger Parloff actually submitted a retraction because he found out so many of the claims that she gave him were false. An interesting thing about this as well is that Roger Parloff actually has a lot of audio clips between himself and Ms. Holmes, and there was a fight over whether or not the jury would hear these things. So attorneys for Ms. Holmes said the government is challenging some of the snippets of that her side wants to play, calling them hearsay. Ms. Holmes' legal team argues they're relevant to the state of her mind and intent. For example, a statement that she made about potentially doing work with the Defense Department is relevant to the government's allegation that she misled investors about Theranos' work for the military. So the jury did end up hearing a lot of these clips. I believe there might have been 16 different segments that they heard in total. And in one, Ms. Holmes tells Mr. Parloff that Theranos is capable of running tests for 1,000 different diagnostic codes, beyond the 200 specific blood tests listed on the Theranos website. Even for tests not named on the site, Ms. Holmes said, "We can handle it." At one point, when Mr. Parloff asks for clarity on something related to the hardware used in Theranos testing, she responds that the answer is to get into how the devices work, which we don't want to get into. As the snippet winds down, Mr. Parloff says, "It's so incredible," after Ms. Holmes tells him they could essentially replicate everything a competitor's lab was doing. She laughs and agrees. Jurors have heard Theranos' device could never perform more than roughly a dozen types of blood tests, and the results were done on commercial devices. In another clip, Ms. Holmes said the Theranos tests were more accurate because it's automated and that it's so controlled. Previous testimony has shown the disarray in the Theranos lab and consistent problems with quality controls. So again, we hear these things she's saying, but previous testimony has told us that they're not true. Interestingly enough, apparently when Roger Parloff was writing his article, Theranos sent him 2 documents that have repeatedly come up over the course of this trial. Jurors saw an email Ms. Holmes sent to Mr. Parloff in June 2014 with some follow-up materials to their conversations, including 2 reports labeled as confidential that purport to be validation of Theranos' technology from pharmaceutical companies. As jurors have heard, the reports from Pfizer Inc. and Schering-Plough Corp. Were actually created by Theranos and did not have the blessing of the 2 companies. Mr. Parloff testified that Ms. Holmes told him Theranos was still doing work with pharmaceutical companies at the time. The journalist also testified that Ms. Holmes told him about work they were potentially doing with the military, but he said he couldn't use it in his article. Promises about military contracts that never came to fruition have been another recurring theme in the trial. I guess after some of the initial Wall Street Journal reporting in 2015 came out, Roger Parloff called Elizabeth Holmes to ask her about it because it did not jive with everything he put in his article. So I guess he asked about all of the tests that the machine could run, and she responded, 50, 60, 70 maybe, we can get you that number. Mr. Parloff said it was the first time he had heard the devices couldn't do 200 or more blood tests that Ms. Holmes claimed they could do. So Mr. Parloff spoke for several hours over the course of Thursday and Friday, talking about all of the things Elizabeth Holmes told him. We heard a lot of segments from those interview tapes, and if I find them online somewhere, if they're available, I will link in the description below if you would like to hear all of those audio conversations between the 2 of them. Essentially, with everything that Roger Parloff reiterated, it's been the same lies that we've heard over the course of the trial, and that was the end of the government's case. So the government rested after the testimony from Roger Parloff. One interesting thing that happened is that the prosecutors actually had to drop 1 count of indictment. If you remember from a couple of videos ago, I talked about testimony from this witness BB that had to be dropped because the government did something with the naming of his blood test and named it inaccurately, and therefore because of that type of clerical error, the actual indictment wasn't correct because it focused on a different type of blood test. And so his testimony had to be thrown out, and because of that, they dropped 1 count of indictment against Elizabeth, so now she's facing 11 counts of wire fraud instead of 12. As the government started to prepare its case, there was an argument about patents being brought forth, which again piqued my interest because I work in patents. So I guess the prosecutors challenged the relevance of showing jurors a list of Theranos patents. They said they're pieces of paper, they're not proof that the technology worked, which, like I said, is true. Patents, can be an idea. They don't have to be a concrete prototype. They don't have to be something that's actually working. It's just kind of an idea. It just has to be physically possible. A defense lawyer said that it would go to Ms. Holmes' state of mind at the time of the alleged crimes, including her understanding of whether Theranos' technology worked. And the judge asked, what's the state of mind? That she's smart? Just kind of an interesting aside I thought I'd share with you guys. As the defense kicked off their case, their first witness is actually a paralegal from their law firm, Williams & Connolly LLP, and he was basically to stand and summarize evidence. Trent Middleton, the paralegal, cheerfully said he sorted through easily thousands of pages of documents to create some summaries and simple statistics for the jury to digest. The data presented jumped from topic to topic, and Mr. Middleton's role was merely to present it, not to delve into meaning too deeply. The defense will likely circle back to the data points with future witnesses. Mr. Middleton told the jury Theranos had 149 U.S. patents issued to it since 2007, with most being filed between 2014 and 2015. Another chart showed customer receipts from 2011 to 2014, which totaled 217.8 million. He also tallied all of the investments in the different round of investing, and we learned that Elizabeth Holmes and her parents were among these investors as well. They also showed a ton of tests that were available and the cost of those tests. The second witness was Fabrizio Bonanni, and he was a former Theranos board member. He testified that he was first approached by Ms. Holmes to be chief operating officer of Theranos in spring 2016. "I said I was too old for that," he said from the stand. Instead, he took a seat on the board so he could offer advice to the company. Mr. Bonanni is a Florence native who spent decades working in biotechnology companies. He was impressed by Theranos but knew it was going through regulatory challenges and criticism in the press at the time he joined the board. Theranos was looking for a new COO after the departure of Sunny Balwani. Honestly, I didn't see much reporting about his testimony because everything was focusing on Elizabeth Holmes directly after him, and I don't believe he spoke for that long. And with this, on Friday, it was a very dramatic moment. The government called Elizabeth Holmes to the stand with only an hour left of court time during the day. As soon as she was brought to the stand, her lawyer, Kevin Downey, asked if she believed Theranos developed technology capable of running any blood test. She said she did. "We worked for years with teams of scientists and engineers to miniaturize all the technologies in the laboratory." Her testimony starts back at the very beginning of everything. So even through Monday, I don't believe we got past 2009 or 2010 in the timeline. Not to say that this isn't interesting, but it's before there were really any problems that were mentioned. So we just kind of go through the Theranos mythology again in Elizabeth's own words. So, we see here Elizabeth begins telling jurors a familiar story, starting with her early days at Stanford. She discussed coming up with the idea for her first patent application, a patch or a pill that could administer medicine in real time. Ms. Holmes testified that Theranos started with a pill that could sense and deliver treatment, then evolve into a patch that could be worn. As I started talking to people about what would be useful, I learned that people were interested in a benchtop or tabletop device, and we moved to try to build that. Which honestly, probably the best move, because like a pill that diagnoses you as it works through your body seems way too sci-fi and way too advanced for anything we're doing right now. Even the patch, I can show you guys, I found this original patent that she has. And you can see in this patent language that she's not even exactly sure what it's going to be, because it says the invention relates to an ingestible, implantable, or wearable medical device comprising a microarray, which comprises a bioactive agent, whatever. So it says ingestible, implantable, or wearable, so they're not even sure what it's going to be yet. And again, we know this technology never really came to fruition. It doesn't work, it's just a cool idea. So by 2004, she was exploring how her idea could benefit pharmaceutical companies. She said, "I met with everyone I could who knew someone in pharma or who was in pharma to understand what they did and what they would be interested in." Her family connections helped a lot. Her dad was a fairly important businessman. He actually was the vice president of Enron, I believe. I just think it's hilarious that her dad was like a VP at Enron, or at least very high up in the ranks, because that's another company that I think in 2007 closed down operations because it was, again, like a huge scam. So I guess scamming just runs in her blood. But anyway, because of these family connections, her dad knew some people and he was able to connect her to someone like Don Lucas, who I believe he went to college with. He then connected her to other people, and that chain of connections kind of went on as she got the confidence of more rich, old, wealthy men, and that helped her grow Theranos. I guess Elizabeth Holmes walked jurors through exhibits Friday afternoon, illustrating a memorable moment in Theranos' early days, this demonstration that it did of an early vision of its technology at a healthcare company, Novartis AG, in Switzerland in November 2006. After the demonstration, the head of Theranos Research and Development at the time, John Howard, emailed Ms. Holmes to say, "What a gratifying morning this has been, our first live demo. Employees in the lab," he said, "were all over every keystroke and log entry as the data came back." He mentions a few employees and their reactions saying, "I've never seen Gary so nervous," etc., etc. After the demonstrations, Ms. Holmes sent an email to the entire company. "Team, we nailed this one. You all did an incredible job making this happen. This is the Theranos way." This is pretty funny because in Bad Blood, the book by John Carreyrou, he talks about how this Novartis demonstration was described as a disaster, where a machine malfunctioned and a fake result was beamed in from California. So it's kind of funny that she talks about this being the Theranos way, and indeed I think it is, to fake it till you make it and lie to people and take a bad result and pretend it was a good one. Elizabeth Holmes did talk about these issues. However, she explained that the problem with the demo was not with the demo itself. It was a problem with the glue used to hold the device together, not the technology, and that the company fixed the problem. That sounds a little bit weird and BS to me, but who knows? Another interesting aside, on Monday morning, since people knew Elizabeth Holmes was testifying, there were crowds out as early as 4 a.m. lining up to try to get a seat, in the overflow room. And sad for them, the trial was actually delayed. It was supposed to start at 9 a.m. and didn't start until about 10:45. And we don't know why. So on Monday, we see a report that noted Theranos systems had been in clinical evaluation, and Ms. Holmes testified that she was told the clinical results were excellent. Automating the blood testing process was a major part of Theranos' argument for why their devices were more accurate. Mr. Downey showed the jurors a paper saying that 93% of the errors in the diagnostic process were human errors, and that Theranos' system would theoretically have helped automate these. This forged Pfizer report was brought up again. On Monday, Elizabeth Holmes' lawyer showed Theranos did continue to have contact with Pfizer, including many years after Dr. Weber came to his conclusions. Ms. Holmes received email from people at Pfizer in 2013 and as late as 2015 discussing the possibility of using Theranos' wellness centers in Walgreens stores. For one upcoming project, we were targeting stores in the Phoenix area, hoping to incorporate the current Theranos installations. Craig Lipset at Pfizer emailed to Ms. Holmes, according to a message displayed in court. It doesn't appear that anything came of the renewed discussions. Here's the thing, though. The fact that they were still talking to people at Pfizer doesn't mean that they had a validation report. You can say, I don't understand what the point is here, because continuing to talk to people does not mean that they gave you a valid report. We heard from Dr. Weber, I believe, too, that he wanted to check in to see if they could validate later in the future. But saying that you had continued talks with people doesn't negate the fact of this doctored report in the first place. We also hear Elizabeth clarify 3 areas Theranos was working with in 2008 and 2009: the Department of Defense, pharmaceutical companies, and academic studies. So in her second day of testimony, she sought to show that an iteration of her blood testing device called the 3.0 performed successfully in a range of different studies. Theranos in 2008 and 2009 was working with the Department of Defense on programs that aimed to predict post-traumatic stress disorder, preventing infection in trauma patients, and managing diabetes. She said Theranos worked with the U.S. Army's Telemedicine and Advanced Technology Research Center and an Army physician who was overseeing research in Texas. Ms. Holmes confirmed that Theranos never formalized a relationship with the Department of Defense. She discussed a study with her alma mater, Stanford. The results of this study were published in a peer-reviewed paper in a clinical journal. However, the defense actually didn't name the journal. I don't know if that's significant. It's just a little weird, because if you say, usually naming a journal would lend you credibility. So the fact that they didn't is just a little odd to me. Elizabeth said these results showed that the system was working well. They also displayed a list of pharmaceutical companies that Theranos was conducting studies with, and her attorney asked her about her recollection of how Theranos' testing technology performed. She said, "I remember it being really good." By 2010, Ms. Holmes said Theranos was focused on putting its blood testing technology in retail stores rather than working with pharmaceutical companies. I also like how they kind of skate away from those pharmaceutical companies, even though they were still claiming they had partnerships with so many of them through 2015. An interesting thing here is that Elizabeth also contradicts some of the testimony we heard from Constance Cullen, I believe, who worked for Schering-Plough. Elizabeth said Schering-Plough hadn't informed her of any concerns the company had about Theranos' technology, and that Theranos later had contact with Merck & Co., the company that merged with Schering-Plough. A defense lawyer showed an email in court that was sent to Ms. Holmes from one of her assistants, a message that summarized a phone conversation with Ms. Cullen that took place about a year after Ms. Cullen was assigned to evaluate Theranos' blood testing machines. By that time, Schering-Plough had merged with Merck, and scientists at Merck had learned of the earlier work with Theranos and were intrigued by it, according to the email. Ms. Cullen was supposed to serve as a reference for Theranos as it pursued a partnership with Merck, and an assistant wrote about a conversation with Ms. Cullen and said, all in all, it was awesome, I think. So the defense is trying to say that Ms. Cullen was not raising any red flags about Theranos and her company. However, again, they skate right past the fact that there was this report or the document with the Sharing Plow logo on it. They don't touch that at all because we know that that was fake. And the last thing that we heard from Elizabeth Holmes on Monday was that in early 2010, she was informed by members of her staff that Theranos' blood testing device called the 4 Series could run any blood test, which would dramatically expand the startup's opportunity. In an email to Ms. Holmes, Ian Gibbons, Theranos chief scientist, wrote that the new technology would be able to run potentially 15 lab tests from a single blood sample, according to the email displayed in court. I understood that the Series 4 could do any blood test, Ms. Holmes said from the witness stand. Now, forgive my ignorance, but I don't know how exactly 15 lab tests corresponds to any blood test, but I mean, this is what she's saying. That's all we heard from Elizabeth Holmes so far. Like I said, it is really just talking about the beginnings of Theranos, her understanding of what the company could do. And today, Tuesday, court is in session from, I believe, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. So she is probably testifying most of today. So I think what I'm going to do again is have another video, depending on when I can get it out, sometime this week, another video about all of her testimony from today, because I'm sure it's going to be a lot and it'll probably get to the cross-examination, which will be very, very interesting. And I think that's really what we're all waiting for, because as we know from her SEC depositions, a lot of those questions they asked her, she didn't really have great responses for. So I don't know if she's being prepped more now than she was then, but it'll interesting to see how she responds to the direct testimony from every witness the government brought, but we shall see. So I will keep you guys updated in my next video. Again, like this video if you like it. Let me know any questions, comments, anything like that you have in the comments below, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Have a great day. Bye.